should future strikes on Iran be needed or actions to defend Israel? Or does the government think that there are legal barriers to the US in doing so? Third, with heightened tensions in the region, can the Foreign Secretary give an update on what further steps are being undertaken to safeguard British military assets in the region and our partners from any unwise military action taken by the Iranian regime? And I say this considering the reports that we heard about over the weekend with the arrest of a suspected Iranian spy plot targeting our base in Cyprus. Are we now stepping up efforts to protect bases? Fourth, what steps are being taken across government and with our police, counter-terrorism, security services to reassess the domestic threat levels? The Foreign Secretary cannot go into operational details, so can he give assurance on the robust action and disruptions to any potential Iran-backed plots that are underway? He mentioned, and rightly so, the issue of Gaza and the fact that we absolutely must work together in terms of ensuring that humanitarian aid gets to people desperately in need of aid. Can the Foreign Secretary update us on what steps he's been taking to engage with Israel to get more aid into Gaza? And does he agree that Iran must be weakened to end their ability to sponsor Hamas and other terrorists in the region?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful, Mr. Speaker, to the tone and the cooperative context in which the Honourable Lady has made her remark, and quite rightly she has a number of questions which I will attempt to answer. But let me just begin by saying, fundamentally, we are in agreement that Iran and the regime in Iran can never have a nuclear weapon, and all of our efforts are designed to ensure that that is the case. And the whole House will understand that this is not just about Iran, the region and global security. It is because we have to remain steadfast in our commitment to not see nuclear proliferation. And if Iran got a nuclear weapon, clearly there would be others in the region that would seek to follow. And so it's a sober commitment that really begins 80 years ago that we must see to completion in relation of their ambitions. She asks about the British nationals in Israel. There are just over 4,000 British nationals that have registered their interests following our appeal last week. And we would estimate that somewhere between 15 to 25% of them indicate, this is following the pattern in previous crises in Israel and in the region, take up the offer of British assistance to leave. As she knows, the airspace has been closed, and so that offer up until this point was about getting them to the border. But I'm very pleased that that flight has landed and taken off. We hope to work with the Israeli government on further flights in the area. My understanding is that there has been a military plane that the Americans have put on for their citizens from Israel, but she will understand the uniqueness of the relationship that the United States has with America that facilitated that opening up, and I'm very pleased that we have been able to garner that same agreement today with the Israeli government. This is an ongoing and fast-moving situation. She has heard what I have advised British nationals in Qatar today, and of course we keep this under close review, and there may need to be further updates over the course of the next few days. It was important that I was in Washington, D.C., sitting with the US administration, and in that meeting with Marco Rubio and Steve Witkoff last week, it was very clear to me that all options were on the table, and President Trump had those options in front of us. I, of course, discussed with them in detail the trip that I would be making alongside my French, German, and the European High Representative in Geneva, and they were keen and hopeful that that might be successful. it was not successful. But we continue to press the Iranians to take the off-ramp and get into those negotiations with the United States and with the E3 to ensure that they are in compliance. She asked about the legal advice. That must rightly be a matter for the US government in relation to their action. And I'm pleased that she mentioned the ministerial code. She will know that Section 213 of the Ministerial Code prevents those of us in government, and she has been in government in the past, discussing legal advice so that government can operate in the appropriate way. But I would say to her, this was not our action. We have been clear that we were not involved. She asked also whether we had any request from the US government. We did not get such a request, but we were notified before the action took place. She asked also about state threats, and it is right to say that we have thwarted 20 such state threats since 2022 in this country, and she will know, including the highest tier that we put Iran on for national interference, that we take the threats from Iran very seriously, and we are reviewing and will come forward with legislation in the coming months in relation to the gaps that Sir John Hall found in how we deal with state threats in our country.
The Select Committee. Dame Emily Thornbury.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The only way to stop Iran from building a nuclear bomb is a deal. There cannot be a deal without negotiations, and there cannot be negotiations without trust. And given that President Trump tore up the first nuclear deal and is now acting alongside Israel, whose attack last week ended the US-Iran negotiations for a new nuclear deal, and given that the war aims of this campaign are so unclear, an emboldened Netanyahu government is calling for a regime change, and President Trump is hinting at it too, it can be difficult to see how in all those circumstances there can be negotiations based on trust. Yes. Does the Foreign Secretary agree that Britain must continue to play a role in these negotiations, even though they must seem an incredibly difficult and challenging prospect?
Yeah. Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend, the Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, for her question. And it goes to the heart of where the UK should be at this time. And that is at the centre of the diplomatic effort. A diplomatic effort that will be necessary at the end of this process. Because sadly, once you have the ability to enrich uranium to 60%, that knowledge is not lost. It is the stepping stone to an advanced weapon, and therefore only a diplomatic solution and the correct framework can ensure that we keep the global community safe.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Callum Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also thank the Foreign Secretary for the advanced sight of his statement. On these benches, Mr. Speaker, we share in the condemnation of an Iranian regime that poses an existential threat to Israel and has terrorised its own people as surely as citizens from other countries around the world, including the UK. That is why we support the consensus in this House that Iran can never be allowed to have nuclear weapons. Yet it is not clear that military action by Israel and the US can provide the long-term lock on Iran's nuclear ambitions which we need. Following this weekend's strike, it is reported that Iran will work at pace to develop weapons with what remains of their enriched uranium supplies. This should give pause to those on the Conservative and Reform benches who have breathlessly echoed President Trump's line that these strikes have been an unrivalled success. For instead of bringing security, Trump and Netanyahu's unilateral actions have increased uncertainty and the risk of a full-scale regional war. Their belief that might is right both further erodes the rule-based international order and undermines the prospects of containing Iran and other rogue states in the long term. This is not in the UK's interest. That is why Liberal Democrats have called consistently for the application of robust diplomacy, supported by IAEA monitoring and grounded in international law, as the only sustainable way permanently to limit Iran's nuclear ambitions. Our immediate priority must now be to ensure the safety and support of British nationals in the region, learning the lessons of unacceptable delays on previous occasions. So I ask the Foreign Secretary, why has it taken over a week since the start of strikes to begin repatriating Britons from Israel? And what more is being done to support those in the wider region who want to leave? The Government has also remained silent on the legality of this conflict, Mr. Speaker. Will the Foreign Secretary now commit to publishing the Attorney-General's advice on whether any UK involvement in this conflict would constitute a breach of international law? And will he confirm that this House will be given a vote before any decision for the UK to enter this conflict?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I agree with the honourable gentleman and the thrust of his remarks, which are around diplomacy and the need for diplomacy at this time. And he's absolutely right about the malign intent of the IRGC and the Iranian regime, whose desire is to wipe Israel off the map. And we must stand up to that pernicious ideology. Our attempts are to gain de-escalation, and I would remind him that just yesterday Vice President Vance has said that delaying the development of a nuclear weapon was the goal. We're at war with Iran's nuclear program. We're not at war with the Iranian people, and it's important to keep that in his mind's eye. He asks about British nationals. He's heard what I said about the airspace being closed. I'm pleased that that first flight has taken off. And I would remind him also that successive UN resolutions, Resolution 2231 particularly, I would refer him to, in relation to this long-standing breach. He asks about the legal advice. He's heard my comments on the legal advice. We were not involved. This is not our legal context, and he asks about publishing the AGs. That might have been appropriate if we were involved, but I don't think it is. But we're not involved, and so there's no such advice to publish.
Dan Cardle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I welcome the Foreign Secretary's calls to move this to a negotiated solution and his focus on UK defence and security. He's right, Iran must never acquire a nuclear weapon. However, history also teaches us on the issue of regime change that interventions aimed at regime change in Iraq, in Libya, in Afghanistan have produced prolonged instability, not just in the region but far wider. So what concrete lessons does he believe can be learned from this recent history in shaping Iran policy today?
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman, but he'll forgive me. I'm not going to enter into a history lesson from the dispatch box, except to remind him that on Sunday I achieved 25 years as an elected parliamentarian, and during the course of that period, of course, there has been debates about regime change. But I also remind him that the US has been clear that their attention is to target the nuclear threat, and we should keep that in mind.
Sir James Cleverly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Foreign Secretary, concede now that the international community's unwillingness to take robust action through things like snapback and the JCPOA mechanism is part of the reason why Israel felt the need to take the initial strikes and for America to do likewise? I agree that ultimately diplomatic means will be the only long-term resolution to this, but that's not just about asking nicely for Iran to put its nuclear weapons away. It is about enforcing them and making sure they do through mechanisms. So will he ensure that if we're not going to be involved in military action, I understand the reason why we might not want to do that, we will ensure robust action is taken underpinned by things that will force Iran to do the right thing rather than just hoping that they will do the right thing?
For his secretary.
Well, I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman, and I know that he knows how difficult it is dealing with Iran. He will remember that under JCPOA, they were allowed to enrich to 3.67%. 3.67. And today, they're at 60%. And the question is, how could that possibly be for civilian use? And I challenged the foreign minister from Iran about this on Friday. We've had 7 rounds of negotiations with the Iranians, and those rounds begun under his government, and he would have been Foreign Secretary for a period when those begun, and they have obfuscated, they have deceived, and the time now is to get real.
Uma Kumram.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Foreign Secretary assure this House that the escalating conflict in Iran, where we all want to see urgent de-escalation, will not take focus from the UK's efforts to end the devastating war in Gaza, to help the Palestinian people, to free the hostages and lift restrictions on humanitarian and medical aid?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. The loss of life over the last few days, hundreds of people who've lost their lives queuing for food is appalling and should offend us all. And of course, when I spoke to Israel's foreign minister yesterday, I reminded him once again about my deep concerns about the new system that Israel has put in place to deliver aid, and our belief that that system will not work, and we need to return to a much better provision.
Afra Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Foreign Secretary has said that Iran must not be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. So does he therefore support the recent targeted strikes by the United States and Israel on Iranian nuclear facilities, yes or no? And if not, can he explain how exactly that inaction would have curtailed Iran's nuclear ambitions?
Foreign Secretary.
I'm afraid I'm not able to give an assessment at this stage of the effectiveness of that action, and neither is the United States. And the Honourable Lady may think that that is a binary question. I don't believe it is a binary question. What the UK is engaged in is diplomacy, and working, of course, with our closest ally, the United States.
Blair McDoon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with this condemnation of the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, but ask that we need condemnation to be matched with accountability? Here in the UK, Jewish communities in particular are deeply concerned at the moment about what lies ahead. Last week at the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, the Iranian ambassador acknowledged that MI5 had identified 23 threats on British soil organised by the Iranian regime. What's his message to Jewish communities who are on a state of high alert at the moment, wondering what will happen?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for his question. He's right that the Iranian regime is the world's worst sponsor of state terrorism and state threats. We have individuals, 3 that have been arrested under our National Security Act, currently moving through our judicial system. And I would want to reassure those in the Jewish community in our country that we take those threats very seriously. And I, working alongside the Home Secretary, will do all we can to keep them, their buildings, their institutions, their families safe.
Sir Julian Lewis.
As usual, I agree with much of what the Foreign Secretary has to say, but I do have to ask him, how many times must a terrorist-funding, fanatical regime threaten to wipe another country from the face of the earth before a government advised by Lord Hermer of Chagos acknowledges that military action to delay and degrade its nuclear weapons program is both ethically and legally justifiable?
Foreign Secretary.
I simply say to the right honourable gentleman, and I say this with all respect, there is a convention in our country about the very important role that Attorney Generals play in our government, able to give government advice when asked for. It happens under all governments, and I don't really recognise the caricature that I've heard or some of the reports. And I want to make it crystal clear, we were not involved in this action. And therefore, really, some of what's being said is wholly beyond the pale.
Up to Sam Mohammed.
Mr. Speaker, many of my constituents have contacted me over the weekend, fearful of the fallout of US intervention in Iran. They know, and we know, that wars do not make the world a safer place, but much more dangerous. Their concerns are not unwarranted. In 2002, Netanyahu offered a guarantee that regime change in Iraq would bring enormous positive reverberations to the region. But we now know that there was no imminent threat, and there were no evidence of weapons. The scale of the disaster, not just in Iraq but across the region, was so profound that the Chilcot inquiry insisted any future military intervention must be met with rigorous scrutiny. Does the Foreign Secretary accept this scrutiny, and will he again provide reassurance to the House that we will not enter an endless war fuelled by provocative, reckless provocateurs?
Foreign Secretary.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and just to say to her, I was in the House during that period in which Chilcot was making his work, and of course I'd want to reassure her that our government, and I hope all future governments here in the UK, have learnt from its findings.
Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Foreign Secretary has confirmed that Britain was not involved in the strikes on Iran. Will he also confirm whether or not the US administration sought permission to use Diego Garcia as the launch point for these strikes? If it was sought and was denied, on what basis did the Prime Minister deny permission? And if it wasn't sought, what does it say about the UK-US relationship that America would rather fly around the world from Missouri than launch from Diego Garcia?
Foreign Secretary.
They did not seek that advice.
Elise Ballinger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Foreign Secretary for his measured approach to this crisis. In past rounds of violence, Iran has often lent on its proxies to conduct retaliation. That includes the Houthis of Yemen, who up until recently have been attacking UK and international shipping in the Red Sea. Can I ask the Foreign Secretary what steps he is taking to protect UK shipping in that area and to keep those trade routes that are so vital for our country safe?
Foreign Secretary.
We have seen that Iran's proxies have been considerably degraded over this period. Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis held back, but still active in the Red Sea. And we will do all we can, working with partners, to protect our shipping routes. And we have been crystal clear to the Iranian regime about the Strait of Hormuz, particularly.
Sir John Whittingdale.
When the Foreign Affairs Committee met the Iranian ambassador twice last week, he claimed that the Iranian nuclear program was legal and purely civil, and he said that they wanted to negotiate. Can the Foreign Secretary say, on the basis of his numerous meetings that he has reported with the Iranian Foreign Minister, whether he gained any impression of Iran's willingness either to dismantle their nuclear program or to negotiate?
Foreign Secretary.
I'm very grateful for the right honourable gentleman's question. It's the central question. And what I have found is inflexibility and a failure to face the seriousness with which the international community are looking at this question, to accept that we've moved on from the JCPOA, which they pulled out of back in 2019, that the focus now is on zero enrichment. Maybe they can have a civil nuclear capability, but it would have to be heavily monitored and would have to have some sort of international regime, I suspect, to be in locus with it. They have to face that seriousness now at this point.
Florence Session-Lund.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement this afternoon. And the Foreign Secretary said that I know the whole House will have in their thoughts the many civilians impacted by this fighting. I have in my thoughts the many protesters who took to the streets after the brutal and tragic killing of Mahsa Amini in 2002, September 2002. We saw those protesters coming forward, standing up against the brutal regime, and we saw people be mutilated. And the last 20 years of intervention has shown that war and wider escalation will not help these people. It will not help the ordinary Iranians who are suffering under this regime. I've received many emails from my constituents, Mr. Speaker. My constituents said the priority should be to negotiate a peaceful resolution to the conflicts and not supplying weapons to either side of the conflict. Further, to support the facilitation of aid to civilians impacted by this war. Can the Foreign Secretary assure me that the UK will not act immediately to follow in on any military action, and we will urge the US and Israel to de-escalate and to avoid targeting innocent civilians?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for mentioning Mahsa Amini, a young woman imprisoned in Iran because of her appearance, killed in police custody, 20,000 people, many of them who protested, thrown in jail as a result, and 500 who effectively were murdered and lost their lives. That's the regime that we're talking about, and she's quite right to remind the House about that this afternoon. And I would refer her to the statements I previously made about our position on diplomacy.
Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For a lot of people watching and worrying over the weekend, they'll have seen many of the hallmarks of Iraq. Yet, despite that, the Foreign Secretary can't tell us whether he believes these strikes were the right thing to do or not. The Foreign Secretary can't tell us whether he believes that these strikes were legal or not. And the Foreign Secretary has failed today to outline whether this House would be given a vote on any potential military action in this conflict. Is he purposely treating the public as fools?
Foreign Secretary.
I've got to say to the honourable gentleman, he may just have got a soundbite, but I'm really on the nuclear question. I'm not going to take lecturing from the honourable gentleman. I'm afraid he's got a very sorry record in relation to that very serious matter. We have been very clear that diplomacy is the way, that de-escalation is our position. That's what you pursue if you're serious about foreign policy, and I'd recommend our approach to the honourable gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I first join the Foreign Secretary in thanking our brave service personnel from RAF Prize Norton for repatriating British citizens back from Tel Aviv. On this Armed Forces Week, I think we are all grateful for their courage and sacrifice. On Iran, let's be clear about the regime. It has killed thousands upon thousands, upheld brutal suppression of democracy, rights of women and LGBT+ people. It has demonstrated a consistent intent to sponsor terrorism and act through proxies and with violence in order to destabilise the region. But all military action must go through the process of international law, and it must be executed based on a plan and intent to return to democracy. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that we must do what we can to support de-escalation as soon as possible?
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for his service in the RAF, and I'm sure he's thinking about former colleagues at RAF Akrotiri and across our 2 sovereign bases in this area, and about our bilateral defence partnership with so many countries in the region particularly. And I'm very pleased to make it crystal clear that the path through this is a diplomatic one, is for Iran to return back to negotiation and to recognise the power of the global community being absolutely clear. They cannot have a nuclear weapon.
Bob Black.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's good news that the Home Secretary has finally decided, reportedly, to prescribe the treacherous terrorist group Palestinian Action. Now, given that she's done that at great speed after the attack recently, and the IRGC have conducted attacks or attempted attacks on this country multiple times, will he now use his powers to persuade the Home Secretary to prescribe the IRGC in its entirety?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman, and the prescription question is always an issue for the Home Secretary. In the decision that she's made today, it's important to stress that it's a process involving all the relevant agencies and their assessment in the activities. But I have to say the attack on RAF bases is disgraceful and totally unacceptable, and the force of the law must bear down on it. She keeps prescription under review. I know it's a long-standing issue that the honourable gentleman has raised.
Jessica Moore.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Foreign Secretary for this statement and acknowledge, like many constituents have this week, the intense diplomatic efforts of his teams in ever-changing and ever-challenging times. But I know they will also want to be reassured, given the absolutely intolerable situation in Gaza, that we will not let up on pressing in absolutely every way we can for more aid to get through and for an immediate ceasefire. And I know the Foreign Secretary said this last week and this week today at the statement, but please could he underline that again?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and this morning I sat in my office with Eli Sharabi, who managed to get out of a Hamas cell, but lost many family members during that journey. And he talked about the starvation that he experienced, going down to 44 kilograms after being 70 when he went in. It was humbling to hear his story, and to be reminded that the humanitarian catastrophe affected everyone in Gaza. But he did say that the Hamas who were holding him ate plentiful while they watched him and others with him starve.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that there's a consensus across, I think, the whole House that Iran should not have a nuclear weapon, it seems to me there's a lack of willingness to recognise when negotiations after many years have patently failed to yield results. So will the Foreign Secretary join Reform and myself in thanking the United States and Israel for degrading the Iranian nuclear weapons programme?
Well, I had two conversations with Secretary of State Rubio yesterday, and I hope he would say that we've established a very good working relationship over that period, and he will know that I have a long-standing or longer-standing relationship with Vice President Vance. And to be clear, the United States position is that we are at war with Iran's nuclear program. This was a targeted attack, and it's important to understand their efforts to degrade, but we have not yet had that assessment as to its effectiveness.
Richard Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Iraq showed the grave dangers of following a right-wing US president into an illegal war for a regime change. The consequences were hundreds of thousands of dead, mass destruction, mass devastation, regional chaos and wasted resources. Many fear that the same thing is happening now. So will the Foreign Secretary confirm that any such war on Iran for regime change would be illegal under international law? And will the Foreign Secretary confirm that he would oppose in UK involvement in any such intervention, in any such war?
Foreign Secretary. Confident in my engagement with the United States and the discussions that I've had, including those in the White House last week, that this is not about regime change. And I should remind the honourable gentleman that the Israelis too have been clear that they are not attacking the civilian leadership in Iran.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
you, Mr. Speaker. It does appear that the House agrees with the government's objective that Iran should never have nuclear weapons, but the government is prepared to will the ends, but not the means. And it begs the question about who is really running the government. Why did Lord Homer's opinion on the legality of military action or UK involvement become public last week? Was it leaked? Was it briefed? And doesn't it demonstrate that the government is paralysed and divided over this question instead of leading from the front?
Foreign Secretary.
No.
Laura Kirkesmith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I commend the Foreign Secretary for urging calm and restraint at this troubling time. I know he's been engaging with European counterparts, notably France and Germany as the E3. But as the positions of the US and Israel and Iran harden, does the Foreign Secretary agree with me that this is a moment where our relationship with Europe as a collective force for diplomacy and peace is going to be crucial?
Foreign Secretary.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. It was important for the so-called E3, the United Kingdom, alongside Germany and France, working with the EU's High Representative to make clear our concerns about Iran's nuclear ambitions to the Iranian forum and urge him to come back to diplomacy. And then all of us were on the phone to him again after the action. Of course, there's an important role for Europe, particularly as the custodians of the JCPOA, and because we have a decision to make about whether we will in fact snap back and impose a heavy set of sanctions on Iran if they fail to comply.
Ellen Maguire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week and today, the Foreign Secretary said that the government's first priority is the welfare of British nationals, and I welcome this. Yet, my constituent, who was caught in Iran with her baby, received unfortunately no support from the Foreign Office and had to plead with officials at the port to evacuate to Oman. This was not a secure route, and another ferry was bombed along the way. She and her baby are now thankfully safe, but still seeking their way back to the UK without their luggage or any provisions for their baby. Can the Foreign Secretary outline what steps are being taken to ensure British nationals, like my constituent, can be repatriated swiftly and safely if they so wish?
Secretary.
Well, I'm very sorry to hear about the position of her constituent and her baby. It must have been immensely stressful to make your way out of Iran in this way. She will know that we have been advising against travel to Iran since 2019. We are able to offer support on the border with Azerbaijan as best we can, but she will also know that the airspace is not open in Iran. But if she writes or is in touch with my honourable friend, the Middle East Minister, of course we'll look at it and what learnings there may be.
Debbie Abrahams.
First of all, I'd like to associate myself with the remarks about condolences to everyone that's lost loved ones. But, Mr. Speaker, we're increasingly seeing foreign leaders both flout international law, but also ignore our international rules-based system, won very hard after the Second World War. So, what is my right honourable friend doing to ensure that we can get this back on track?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for the question. It was very appropriate to meet with the Iranian Foreign Minister in Geneva. In so many ways, the home under the United Nations umbrella of the multilateral system and the rules-based order. And that is why we were with him as the E3 and as the EU to reinforce messages that we share with the United States and to try and broker, and we will keep trying, a diplomatic solution.
Jim Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning, the Foreign Secretary was repeatedly asked if he considered the US's bombing of Iran to be legal. Now, while I'm sure everyone in this House recognises the brutality of the Iranian regime, his obfuscation in reply was clear, as is the refusal to say whether Britain would get involved in any capacity if the US falls deeper into a conflict with Iran. Can we have a clear answer from the Foreign Secretary now to that question? And can he clearly state that de-escalation must mean no UK involvement?
Foreign Secretary.
Can I just say to the honourable gentleman, We have UK nationals in the region. We have UK bases in the region and force protection that is its highest level. We have several thousand troops in the region. Of course their welfare is our priority. Of course we've moved assets in a precautionary way into the area. And of course we will work alongside our allies to protect them and to protect our people. I can give him that assurance wholeheartedly.
Stella Crease.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think we all share the concern of the Foreign Secretary to get back to how do we end the horrors that we are seeing in Gaza and a clarity about the dangerous risks that Iran presents. But that also means that we need to ask some difficult questions about how we get the negotiations going. Now, we've seen today that the Israeli forces have deliberately targeted the Evin prison in Tehran. It was the prison in which Nazim Zahawi Redcliffe was held. So what conversations has he had with the Israeli government about whether they are now moving to target non-military installations, and what does he think that would mean for the ability of negotiations to restart?
Foreign Secretary.
I'm grateful to my Honourable. Can I reassure her that I spoke to the Israeli Foreign Minister yesterday. I spoke to him briefly again this morning, and he reassured me that the targets, that the military targets, the nuclear facility, remains their objective and their focus at this time.
Kit Walters.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Away from the headlines, as the Foreign Secretary said, hundreds of Gazans have been losing their lives. And let's be clear about what's happening. As tens of thousands of people daily walk miles to beg for food from American mercenaries, they're being shot at random in the street. Now, I think we've moved beyond in this House as asking the Foreign Secretary to actually lift a finger beyond mouthing the words to do anything about this. But I have a wider question. Does he envisage that the UK will play any sort of part in there being some sort of consequence in the future for these outright murders?
Foreign Secretary.
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, and I know the strength of feeling that he has on these issues and the consistency with which he has pressed these issues from the backbenches, can I reassure him that in the White House last week we did not just discuss the situation in Israel and Iran. I also discussed the situation in Gaza, and our discussion was about the chances of a ceasefire. The prospects of that ceasefire are currently with Hamas, deep in their system and in their tunnels, but I remain hopeful that we will get a breakthrough in the coming days and weeks, and that the suffering that we are seeing is alleviated.
I'm aiming for 5 o'clock so we can speed up question and answer. Very helpful and good example. Louise Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When there was US offensive action against Iran 5 years ago, we saw proxy action taken against UK and US personnel deployed in the Middle East, where we sadly lost Lance Corporal Brodie Gillen. I don't expect the Foreign Secretary to give me details, but can he assure me that everything's being done to make sure that there is adequate force protection for those who are still deployed on behalf of this country?
Foreign Secretary.
Very grateful to the Honourable Lady for asking that question, and to give that reassurance, our highest levels of force protection to all our wonderful personnel, many of whom I've met, who are in the region.
Can I thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement and also for emphasising the importance of restraint and de-escalation at this very perilous moment. But can I ask him what steps he's taking to try to align and coordinate his diplomatic efforts with those of our European and G7 allies in the hope of presenting this united diplomatic front?
Secretary.
Grateful for the question. I have spoken, of course, to our G7 allies over the course of the last few weeks. I've spoken to our partners in the region, the Levant, as well as the Gulf, particularly, and I will continue to do all I can. And obviously, NATO in the coming days will be another forum in which we can reach a common path towards diplomacy.
As the Member of Parliament for the largest Jewish school in Europe, can I thank the Foreign Secretary for the assurances that he gave earlier on the community in this country being safeguarded. Can I also commend the way in which he has diligently pursued a negotiated outcome to this destabilised situation. He knows that it used to be said that the Israeli Prime Minister jumped to the tune of America. Now that it seems to be the other way round, what action will he take against Prime Minister Netanyahu specifically in order to stop the destabilisation of the Middle East?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm grateful for the honourable gentleman's question. We do have disagreements with the government of Israel, and he knows that a few weeks ago we sanctioned 2 members of that government. But I remain, and the government remains, a friend of Israel, able to work at many different levels. And we recognise the contribution that has been made at this time to the degrading of proxies working on behalf of Iran, recognising that those proxies contribute to Iran being the worst actor on state threats globally.
David Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If Iran chooses to close the Straits of Hormuz, which the Iranian Parliament have now voted to do, what contingency options has the Foreign Secretary worked up to protect UK national interests?
Or can I assure him that these issues are, of course, under consideration in the government? All contingencies are in place, and we are in discussion with our allies about that, but it would be wrong for me to go into operational detail.
Clive Lewis.
Can I associate myself with the comments made across the House about the dire and despicable nature of the Iranian regime? But that said, last week the Foreign Secretary told the House that attacks on Iran were not in our national interest. So does he believe the strikes led by Trump and Netanyahu, 2 hard-right authoritarians with no love for a rules-based order, have made Britain or the world any safer? Or does he agree with me that for much of the world watching, the message is chillingly clear? In a global order where rules mean little and might makes right, deterrence, not diplomacy, is now the only defence. And that, as he must acknowledge, makes global security more precarious than ever.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and I recall that my honourable friend also recognises the problems of that nuclear threat and nuclear proliferation. An assessment has not been made yet of the effectiveness of that military action, but he will have heard my remarks in relation to diplomacy. That is the way now, and it will be the way when we get beyond this current crisis.
Brendan Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've been here for an hour, and still the Foreign Secretary appears incapable of saying whether he supports or condemns America's actions, or whether he regards them as being legal or not. And nowhere in this statement does the role of international law even merit a mention. So will the Foreign Secretary take this opportunity now to tell us whether he believes that America's unilateral action was compliant with international law?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I've got to tell the honourable gentleman, I qualified and was called to the bar in 1995. I haven't practised for the last 25 years. It is not for me to comment on the United States' legal validity. I would refer him to Article 51 and Article 2 of the UN Charter, and he can seek his own advice.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend is right to focus on de-escalation and diplomacy. However, we know that the JCPOA did not curtail Iran's enrichment of uranium. So what learning will he take as he rebuilds the architecture for diplomacy to ensure that Iran cannot rebuild its nuclear enriched uranium?
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. With Iran enriching at 60%, and the IEA saying that it has no credible civilian justification for this high enrichment level, she's quite right. And therefore the debate has moved on, and it's moved on to zero enrichment.
Sir Gavin Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Foreign Secretary make it clear to the House that if the United States needs to take further action to degrade and destroy Iran's nuclear capabilities, and if they request to use either Diego Garcia, Cyprus or any other British military facility, that we will make sure that that is available to them?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that in my discussions with the United States and with Secretary of State Rubio, and I think he saw this from the thrust of the press conference that was held in the United States yesterday, that is not their intention. He will know that they are assessing now what has happened, and they are hoping that it has been a targeted response, a single response. That is the thrust of what we're being told by the United States at this time.
John Crane.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement. I understand the priority to evacuate UK citizens from Israel, but advice to our constituents Qatar to shelter in place until further notice is hardly comforting. Can I press the Foreign Secretary to outline what more detail will do for UK citizens in the wider region and whether there is a specific threat against them?
Foreign Secretary.
The message that I gave earlier at the dispatch box is in the context of a fast-moving situation, and advice that was given by the US shortly before standing up. Of course we keep our advice updated, and we are on high alert right across the region.
Alton.
Mr. Speaker, what is UK government policy on whether regime change should be pursued in Iran, yes or no?
Foreign Secretary.
I said that in talking to Secretary of State Rubio, in talking to Vice President Vance, in talking to Envoy Steve Witkoff, that is not the objective of the United States. And of course, it is not our belief that it's for us to change the regime of any country, that it must be for the people themselves.
Ian Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's absolutely right to call for de-escalation at this extremely dangerous time. However, the Foreign Secretary will know that the United States attack on Iran has raised serious questions if it was a violation of international law. Israel's genocide in Gaza and its occupational settlements in the West Bank is of course also illegal under international law. So can the Foreign Secretary tell me if the government still professes to believe in the international rules-based order, or are we now admitting we are content to support countries who act outside it?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'd refer the honourable gentleman to what I said in the chamber this afternoon. Of course we believe in the rules-based order and international law. That was precisely why I was in Geneva on Friday for 7 hours, attempting to get Iran to comply and get back around the negotiating table.
Jeremy Corbett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning on the radio, the Foreign Secretary told us of his adherence and support for the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and used that as an argument for the bombardment of Iran. Has he said anything to Israel about its illegal holding of nuclear weapons, its possession of a delivery system, and obviously the danger to anybody if there is a nuclear-armed neighbour who may well use them? What has he actually said to the government of Israel about their nuclear weapons?
Foreign Secretary.
I want to recognise that the right honourable gentleman has been campaigning on these issues over many, many years and has taken strong positions on nuclear proliferation. I don't want to go back to the days of Mordecai Vanunu, but I would just remind him, Israel is not threatening its neighbours with nuclear weapons. It's Iran that we must stop at this time.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend believe that the attacks on Iran are beneficial to this country, or will they create more instability in the Middle East and beyond? And is there a cost to the UK as an upholder of the rules-based international order which he says that we still support, if the actions of our allies, the United States and Israel, are judged to be contrary to international law?
Foreign Secretary.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and I know he's learned in these matters, and he will have strong views. What I can say to him is that we are seeking de-escalation, we are pursuing diplomacy, and we are doing that according to the rules-based order and our belief in the international architecture that was set up on the backs of men and women who lost their lives and gave so much in the Second World War.
Harriet Ball.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Foreign Secretary has referred a number of times to the diplomatic off-ramp. So can he confirm to the House that the diplomatic off-ramp, the request of the United Kingdom to Iran, is that the regime change its stance and finally recognises the right of our ally Israel to exist?
I can. Of course, it should recognise the right of Israel to exist, and it should work with the United States and the E3 particularly to ensure that it is putting whatever has been developed beyond use.
Luke Akers.
Mr. Speaker, over the past decades, Iran and its terrorist proxies have effectively colonised 5 Middle Eastern countries and used them as launching pads for attacks against Israel. Iran's been goading and indeed preparing for a conflict with Israel for decades, including the genocidal intent behind its nuclear weapons development. How will the UK support our many allies in the region, Arab countries as well as Israel, facing similar threats from the Iranian regime?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and can I remind him that we have the strongest of bilateral defence relationships with Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Oman, UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Iraq and Lebanon at this time, and they can rely on us.
Ayab Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But forgive me, Mr. Speaker, I've got to press the Foreign Secretary on this point. A lot of honourable members have asked him specifically whether he supports the attack conducted by the United States. He's refused to answer that question. Is it because, like many of the British public, realised that it was an illegal attack on Iran?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I said on the radio this morning, and let me say again, I will continue to work with our closest ally to ensure that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Secretary of State's calls for a durable diplomatic solution. No one benefits from this conflict continuing. Will the Foreign Secretary outline what steps the government is taking to ensure peace and prevent war in the region, particularly guaranteeing that the Straits of Hormuz remain safe for LNG and oil tankers? Securing this vital trade route is essential for global stability and global economic security, including Iran's.
Foreign Secretary.
I'm very grateful to the question from my honourable friend, and that's because many members of the public beyond this chamber will be worrying about the risk on inflation of an oil shock particularly, and will want to be reassured that the government is doing everything it can to be clear to Iran that it cannot blockade the Strait of Hormuz, it cannot mine the Strait of Hormuz, it must not do that, and we of course will act with allies to prevent such an occurrence if it were to occur.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It seems for an hour and a quarter we've been going round in circles, in that in answering questions, the Foreign Secretary has rightly pointed out that diplomacy has failed to stop Iran reaching 60% enriched uranium. Likewise, he has rightly acknowledged that diplomacy has failed to stop Iran spreading terrorism and sponsoring terrorism around the region, yet each time he's concluded in a hope of greater rounds of diplomacy to solve this, and hope is not a strategy. So at what point will the Foreign Secretary acknowledge that there probably can be no diplomacy within a regime that is so brutal to its own people and that just won't listen?
The honourable gentleman is a bright man. He knows that once a country has acquired the means to enrich to 60%, the expertise exists, and only a diplomatic solution can create the framework to eradicate and control that expertise. And that is why, in the end, this can only be dealt with diplomatically, and it's why President Trump is urging Iran to return to the negotiating table.
Mr. Speaker, as well as the Iranian regime's threat to Israel, the Iranian regime has also supported Assad to kill 500,000 people in Syria, including Palestinians, and supplies Putin with the drones he is currently using to massacre people in Ukraine. We must also remember, of course, that it persecutes its own people, including human rights activists. And just as ministers have, I'm pleased to say, engaged with Syrian activists in the UK to hear their views on the future of their country, can I ask ministers and the Foreign Secretary assure me that they will engage with human rights activists and democracy activists here in Britain to help guide their approach going forward?
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend's question. His articulacy is spot on, and I can give him that undertaking between myself and the Minister for the Middle East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We talk weekly in this place about Russia's illegal bombing of Ukraine. Now, Russia may not be a close ally like the US, but presumably, if international law applies to that, then the US bombing of Iran would likewise be illegal under international law. If not, then could the Foreign Secretary explain why international law would apply differently to the US and where that leaves us if this conflict escalates in the region?
I say gently to the honourable lady, one should always be wary of moral equivalence. Russia invaded a sovereign country, and for the last years has been firing rockets into that country, aided by Iran. And we will continue to stand up to Putin's abysmal aggression, and of course he should be held to account.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Foreign Secretary for his continued clarity that the UK has not been involved in this military action in the Middle East, and thank him and his team for all their diplomatic efforts on de-escalation. I agree with what he said about the horrific situation in Gaza, where in the last week more than 100 Palestinians have been killed while starving and waiting for aid. He said he's pressed the US and Israel on this in the last week. Can I ask if he's continuing to discuss this and press for action together with France and Canada? And given his remarks about UK citizens in Qatar, what can he say about conversations with the Gulf and Jordan on protecting our citizens, assets and others there, should it be needed?
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. Yes, I've liaised with Jordan, I've liaised with Gulf partners. I will be speaking to the UAE very shortly, later on today. We will work with them to keep them safe, and she's absolutely right to put on record our deep concerns about those who've lost their lives in Gaza just over the last few days.
And Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Foreign Secretary and his department for the work they're doing to protect British citizens here and abroad. What does he think needs to happen for Iran to abandon its ambitions to build and deploy a nuclear weapon?
Iran has got to recognise that it's lost its air defences. That it's my belief that its friends in Russia and China will be not rushing to its aid, that its proxies are degraded, and the international community is firm. They cannot have a nuclear weapon. They have now got to come back to the negotiation table. We've got to put in a framework that deals with the stockpiles, that deals with the centrifuges, and deals with enrichment of 60%, and deals with the problem of ballistic missiles.
Jacob Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement and for his level-headed approach in calling for de-escalation. He's spoken about the further threat of escalation with the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which, of course, he knows a large proportion of the world's oil supply flows. Can he say more about how he will protect UK households and businesses from these potential rising oil prices?
It's important that we de-escalate at this time. It's important that diplomacy prevail, and of course it's important that we work with our allies for every contingency. So I'm not in the business of talking up fears about a shock in oil prices, but working to reassure the British people that we are doing all we can to see that that eventuality does not come to pass.
Robin Swan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Iran must never have a nuclear weapon, is something this House has agreed on. But the former Russian Premier Dmitry Medvedev has said there will be now a number of countries considering supplying nuclear warheads to Iran. Can I ask the Foreign Secretary of his assessment of that statement, and what is the government doing to prevent it?
It would be wrong for me to go into detail about that, but to say that, of course, it's come to my attention, and also to put on record my grave concerns by the reports that Iran's parliament are preparing to withdraw from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. That would isolate Iran further.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Further escalation in the Middle East could have devastating consequences not only for the region but for global stability. And given the provocative and inflammatory rhetoric from President Trump, and the risk of unpredictable US actions further destabilising the situation, can the Foreign Secretary set out what steps the government is taking to work with international partners to de-escalate tensions and protect the UK interests? And can he give a definitive answer to the question about UK involvement?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend that we were not involved. And over the weekend, I spoke to my Cypriot counterpart, I spoke to my Lebanese counterpart. In the days before that, I spoke to all counterparts in the Gulf. Of course, we are working to de-escalate at this time.
Subject.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the event that Iran does launch a retaliatory military strike against the US, what does the government believe our Article 5 obligations would be with regards to military support for the US? And how will that change if the location of the attack is in the region?
Yeah. Well, can I refer him to 213 of the Ministerial Code?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. With his 25 years of parliamentary service, the Foreign Secretary will no doubt remember when Tony Blair told us that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction and were a grave threat to international security. And then, of course, we followed America into an illegal war in the Middle East. And if the Prime Minister were to go down that same road, then he will be wrong also. Is it not overdue that the government followed an independent and, as Robin Cook memorably said, an ethical foreign policy, one created here and not in Washington, DC?
Well, the honourable gentleman allows me to put on record what a privilege it's been to serve and work as Foreign Secretary alongside a Prime Minister of such tremendous principle and legal learning, that entirely understands his obligations, entirely understands what good government looks like, and is absolutely steadfast in his belief in the international rules-based order.
Cameron Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Foreign Secretary for the gravity which he's applying to this important topic. 1 week ago, the Foreign Secretary told me that he had huge confidence in our ability to defend our Middle Eastern assets from Iranian strikes. But within 2 days, 2 strategic assets were vandalised by a couple of civilians on an e-scooter at RAF Bryce Norton. Yeah. Does the Foreign Secretary recognise that the UK must not follow Trump into Netanyahu's war with Iran when force protection is inadequately resourced at home?
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for his service in the RAF, and can I refer him to a statement that the Armed Services Minister will shortly be making in the House about the security of our sovereign bases.
I think so.
Mr. Speaker, just a week ago we were here calling for de-escalation due to so many civilian deaths, but in the last week we have seen an escalation with so many more civilian deaths in Israel, in Gaza, in Iran. We know it's much easier to get into a conflict than to conclude it. If the justification for military action is now a nuclear weapons programme and being a threat to your neighbours, how many other nations fit that category? Isn't North Korea another country with an even more advanced nuclear weapons programme? Where is Article 51, UN Convention, now in terms of justification?
Well, my honourable friend's question goes to the heart of why it would be a travesty for Iran to withdraw from the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and why we must work to ensure that Iran does not become a North Korea. It must never have a nuclear weapons programme, and we will do everything to stop that happening.
David Simmons.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. The family of my constituent, Katie Solomon, have been in touch to share their fears about her as she shelters from Iranian attacks in Israel. And my constituent, Mehdi Mosleh, has told me about how his life in the UK started as a refugee from the Iranian regime. So can the Foreign Secretary tell my constituents in the House why, given Iran's record, he is finding it so difficult to follow the Prime Minister in welcoming the actions of our allies in seeking to reduce the risks posed by the Iranian nuclear programme?
Well, can I say to the honourable gentleman that he will recall that in representing my constituency in Tottenham, I have the Stamford Hill area of London, which is the home of many in our Orthodox Jewish community, many of whom are in Israel as we speak, sheltering too in their bunkers. So the picture he paints is one that I recognise, and it's why I'll do everything I can to work with them and protect them.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my right honourable friend for his statement. Dozens of people from my Hendon constituency have been stranded in Israel and Iran. I thank the Foreign Secretary for his hard work on this issue, and it's good news that the first flight has already occurred. Can he say more about the timeframes for potential future flights, and also say more on what is being done to support those looking to leave Israel by land, borders or by sea?
I updated the House about our rapid response teams that are working in Israel and at borders for those who are able to journey to the land borders in Jordan and Egypt to leave. We have a flight in the air as we speak, and I expect that there will be further flights in the coming days, but it does depend on airspace and how those days look.
Lincoln Chop.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Foreign Secretary for a statement in which he says that he's been crystal clear with the regime in Tehran. I hope he's been a lot clearer with them than he has been with the House today, because I'm going to give it one more go, because I genuinely don't understand why he can't answer this question. Does His Majesty's government support or oppose US military action against Iran at the weekend?
His Majesty's government will continue to work with our closest ally, as I was last week in Washington, DC.
Sir Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I do thank the Foreign Secretary for his energy he's invested in de-escalation because it's the only moral route out of this conflict. And I thank him also for reassuring us that UK forces aren't involved and not giving up for the plight facing ordinary Gazans. There's 90 million people in Iran. Just under 10 million of them are in Tehran. There's reports of many of them trying to leave the country, and this will be made worse by the reports around the speculation around regime change. There's also reports that Turkey and Pakistan might be closing their borders to refugees. Is this something he's keeping a watchful eye on, and has he discussed it with our international partners?
Well, I'm very grateful to you, honourable friend, for the question, and it was why I spoke to our ambassadors and teams across the region this morning, because I recognise that this is a worrying and stressful time in all of those areas, which is why my central message and task is to de-escalate. We need more light and less heat.
If I heard the Foreign Secretary correctly, he said that the UK would act if Iran sought to block the Strait of Hormuz. Did he mean act militarily? And then under what other conditions would he consider military action? And what would he say if the Americans turned to this government and asked them for support in any military adventure to do with this conflict?
It would be quite wrong for me from this dispatch box to get into eventualities and operational matters at this time. But be reassured that all contingencies are in place to keep our people and to work with our allies to keep the region safe.
Adam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The most in-depth study ever conducted on the casualties of the war on so-called terror was conducted by Brown University in America. They found that directly or indirectly, over 4.5 million people lost their lives. 4.5 million people partially lost their lives because of what was voted for in this House. So can the Minister agree with me that the only resolution to this conflict is through diplomacy? And can he assure the House he will not follow the previous Labour government and the previous Labour Prime Minister Tony Blair's mantra when it comes to America bombing Middle Eastern country is with you whatever, and lead this country and the world into the abyss?
Well, I can restate, as I have throughout this afternoon, that diplomacy is in the way, and I can remind him that our government and successive governments have learned from the Chilcot inquiry.
Speaker, why should the House of Commons and the country that we represent not be entitled to know whether their government supports or regrets the American action? And doesn't equivocation in that issue bring succour to those we say must be robbed, quite properly, of their nuclear potential?
I think the people of Britain are entitled to know that we were not involved in this action, that we work for diplomacy and de-escalation. That is why I was sitting in the White House last week. It's why I was in Geneva on Friday, and it was why I was at a COBRA meeting and making a round of calls to allies and partners to de-escalate at this time yesterday.
Sarah Poach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Foreign Secretary, is he able to explain to the House whether the United States felt unable to use the Diego Garcia base and have to refuel in a highly dangerous operation 3 times because of that, because of your deal that you did with the Mauritians that would then tell the Chinese, that would then tell the Iranians?
The Honourable Lady has got to get off social media and has got to get some help. Has got to get some help because she's swallowing conspiracy theories that should not be repeated in this House.
Ellie John,
answer the question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Iranian regime has long been a threat to peace, democracy and human rights, but the unilateral, illegal and dangerously provocative Israeli and now American attacks have made a tense situation extremely perilous and are completely outside international law. It's therefore deeply concerning to hear the Secretary of State echoing the talking points of Netanyahu and Trump, instead of standing up for those principles, clearly condemning the illegality of these bombings and unequivocally ruling out the UK being dragged into any military action supporting such illegal action. Why will he not?
I'm focused on Iran's desire for a nuclear weapon. I'm focused on the UK's solemn obligation to stop that happening. And I am focused on the diplomacy that is required to bring that about.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement today. I've often spoken in this chamber about the Iranian regime and the horrific human rights abuses that take place under IRGC control. I have nothing but admiration for the steps taken to destroy Iranian nuclear armament by our US and Israel allies. These are steps that we must support. So will the Foreign Secretary confirm that the UK stands shoulder to shoulder with the US and Israel as they do what needs to be done, and further that we send a message to Iran that retaliation in any form will not be acceptable and they will face the might of the best armed forces in the world, that is the British Armed Forces?
I can reassure the honourable gentleman that of course we stand with our allies in the United States and indeed in Israel in facing down the repeated threats from Iran, an existential threat, of course, to Israel, but a destabilising in the neighbourhood. Of course we will stand up to them.
Right, let the front benches change. We now come to the statement for the business trade. Secretary of State.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I wish to make a statement on how this Labour government is backing British business and British workers with the launch of the UK's modern industrial strategy. At the outset, I would like to thank Dame Claire Barclay and all the members of the Industrial Strategy Advisory Council for all their outstanding work and that of my officials in preparing the launch of this strategy today. Mr. Speaker, in an uncertain world, stability, clarity and consistency are needed now more than ever. The challenges we face require nothing less than a government on the pitch, clearing the way for private enterprise and doing so in the best interests of working people. That is what this pro-business, pro-worker government is going to deliver. Today, I launch a strategy to make Britain the best place in the world to start and grow a business, based on a fundamentally new economic approach from what we have had in the past, a break from the declinism, the dither, the disinterest that defined the last Conservative government. This strategy speaks to the strength and breadth of our economy, be it building strong industrial foundations, powering frontier technologies, or supporting our world-leading services sector to innovate and to thrive. It brings together every bit of government to drive investment, improving the total business environment by drawing on every government department's expertise. It is a plan to rebuild Britain through new jobs, new industries and new investments. A plan to launch thousands of new careers in engineering, life sciences and professional services and more. A plan where Britain's future is designed and built in Britain. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I accept. Until this government came to power, British business was treated to a merry-go-round of policy changes, only matched by the shuffling of successive business secretaries. We are now providing the stability that is at such a premium across the world. Make UK have long called for, and I quote, a funded and joined-up long-term vision as a matter of urgency for stability and investment, and I couldn't have put it better myself. So from the moment we took office, we said we would pursue this new economic approach, where industrial policy would be something done with business and not to business. And we are fulfilling that commitment today. And I would like to place on record my thanks also to the thousands of businesses who've engaged in this process, that have designed this strategy with us. And this is not a document that will be printed and then forgotten. We will put the Industrial Strategy Council and the Industrial Strategy on a statutory footing to hardwire these changes for the long term. Madam Deputy Speaker, this government has brought stability and openness and a pro-growth agenda. But as I've told this House previously, working people must feel the benefits of economic growth. We must go further and faster if we want to achieve the kind of economic growth the public should expect and see in their public services and feel in their pay packets. Business has provided a wealth of testimony and evidence to the areas they see as holding them back, and there are no surprises to that list. It starts with energy, because we have amongst the highest industrial electricity prices in the developed world at present. They went up 50% in real terms under the previous government. Skills, because when you have vacancies at the same time as 1 in 8 young people are neat, and net immigration at 1 million as it was when we took office, something has gone badly wrong. And place, because too much of the country has been held back by crumbling infrastructure and a lack of investment and by the north-south divide. And that ends now. We will make the bold choices to ensure every region and every nation can play to their strengths. And finally, access to finance, because without access to capital, we will always have a ceiling on ambition. Today, we have smashed through these barriers. Let me take each of these 4 specifically in turn, starting with energy. Today, we have announced that we will slash electricity costs by between 20 and 25% through a new British industrial competitiveness scheme. This will bring our prices more closely in line with Europe, and it will be a game changer. We will also put in place the reforms we need for businesses to get the much faster connections to the grid that they need. Now, this means companies in sectors like car making and chemicals who will see their electricity costs cut. The scheme could benefit over 7,000 businesses with high electricity usage in industrial strategy, foundational industries and high-growth manufacturing sectors, which collectively employ over 300,000 skilled workers. As well as this, we will launch an expanded version of the Supercharger scheme so that some of our largest companies in electricity-intensive sectors, including investments in the future, such as the new Steelworks electric arc furnace at Port Talbot and the Agratas Gigafactory in Somerset, who will see their network charging exemptions rise from 60% to 90%, cutting their electricity bills and again making them more competitive than our European neighbours. I understand this was something the previous government actually promised to business, but again failed to deliver. And I confirm this will all be done without adding a penny onto consumer bills or onto the bills of any other business. Secondly, we are shaking up the skills system to prioritise digital, engineering and defence skills so British workers can secure good, secure jobs in tomorrow's economy. Our industrial strategy sectors are already on track to create 1.1 million new good, well-paying jobs with the help of this industrial strategy. And we want those opportunities to benefit all of our constituents. That's why we're investing over £275 million in our engineering skills package and the Skills Mission Fund to deliver training and new technical excellence colleges as part of our wider skills offer. And through our global talent visa reforms and the Global Talent Task Force, we are also ensuring that UK businesses can recruit the best of the best from here and abroad. And on the issue of place, on the economic geography of the UK, which means a great deal to me and many of my colleagues who listened to grand plans to level up that turned into a few new extra flower pots and empty promises. I want to be clear, this strategy is unashamedly ambitious. It chooses to back where there are clusters of high-growth sectors, and it will work with the devolved governments, the mayors and local leaders to boost that growth. We're making it easier to get money to places, to turn investment into spades in the ground and cranes in the sky, through industrial strategy zones that will bring together our existing network of free ports and investment zones. And we will also, for the first time, include a new programme, identifying investable sites where we will fast-track development, similar to the approach taken in France. But our infrastructure must match our ambition, so we'll strengthen connections between city regions and clusters through the Oxford to Cambridge Growth Corridor, the Growth Corridor across our northern city regions, the Edinburgh-Glasgow Central Belt, and through rail enhancements in Wales. Finally, we will unlock billions of pounds in business finance, with the National Wealth Fund supporting our growth sectors, with an expanded role for UK export finance, and £4 billion for growth capital for start-ups and scale-ups through a larger British business bank, addressing that key stage at scale-up that we know is the most challenging. This growth capital will catalyse £12 billion of private capital across the 8 growth-driving sectors and deliver around £30 billion of additional GVA to the UK economy. Now, these measures, alongside our transformative sector plans, are how we can realise the untapped potential in key parts of our economy. For instance, by 2035, we aim to double business investment in advanced manufacturing, increasing the volume of vehicles produced in the UK to 1.3 million, while creating the first European market for self-driving vehicles. We are turbocharging our clean energy mission with investment in offshore wind, in small modular reactors, in carbon capture, in green hydrogen, in gigafactories, ports and green steel. We will make our United Kingdom one of the top 3 places in the world for creating and scaling digital technology business. That means training 1 million young people in tech skills and expanding our AI research resource by at least 20-fold by 2030. We will significantly increase business investment in our world-leading creative industries sector to £31 billion, cementing our position as one of the great creative exporters in the world. For our life sciences sector, our ambition is that the UK will be, by 2030, the leading life sciences economy in Europe, and by 2035, the 3rd most important life sciences economy globally, after the US and China. At the same time, We plan to double business investment in professional and business services to £61 billion, ensuring the continued growth in a powerhouse industry that accounts for millions of jobs in the UK, the vast majority of them outside of London. And we have already announced the largest increase in defence spending since the Cold War, and will use this to transform the UK into a defence industrial superpower by 2035, leading Europe in defence exports and closing the gap in venture capital investment in defence with the US by half. And for our financial services, the heart of business investment and stability, we will harness opportunities as markets digitise and adopt new technologies, and ensure the whole economy feels the benefits of increased investment. And this industrial strategy also ensures that places and sectors can take full advantage of the UK's position as a global hub for trade. The UK has long been and will remain a champion of free trade, which is why, under this government, we've delivered trade agreements with our biggest trading partner in the world, with the biggest economy in the world, and with the fastest growing economy in the world, making the UK the best connected market in the world. And through this industrial strategy, we are reaffirming our commitment to free, fair, resilient trade, while shielding businesses from supply chain disruption and market-distorting practices. We'll leverage our relationships with Europe, the US, with China, with the Gulf and beyond, so businesses can make the UK their base to connect with global markets. It will work, hand in glove with the trade strategy my department will publish later this week, to help British companies break into new markets, to export more and to grow more. In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a watershed moment. For too long, governments have been a source of problems for British business and not a path to solutions. That has resulted in parts of the country like where I and many of us here grew up, where we watched yards and factories close along with the door to opportunity. A sense we were losing the past, but we had no bridge to the future. That also ends now, because our plan for change is backing this country's greatest assets and frontier industries to put more money into people's pockets, to raise living standards, and to unleash a decade of national renewal. I welcome Make UK's comments that today is one of the most important days for British industry in a generation. Yeah. We are creating prosperous, proud and outward-facing but self-reliant, independent and highly skilled nation. A country where opportunity, skills and wealth are spread fairly, where every person and every business will have the chance to flourish. That is what our modern industrial strategy will deliver, Madam Deputy Speaker. Our future in our hands, built in Britain. That is what this strategy will achieve, and I commend this statement to the House.
I know, please be seated. I know that the